Assalamualaikum and hi everyone. So I'm going to show you the sample answers for your assignment 1. Question 1 is taken from 2015-2016 second semester exam paper. In the question, it says the income tax of a person is calculated based on his or her taxable income. The taxable income is calculated by subtracting his or her tax deduction amount from his or her total income. So we have taxable income equal to total income minus with tax deduction amount. Then the income tax amount is calculated as income tax amount equal to taxable income times with tax rate. The tax rate is given in the table. And then it says you are required to write a tax calculator application to calculate the tax amount to be paid by a person. The application uses two classes as shown in the UML diagram. So we have tax UML diagram and also tax calculator user interface UML diagram. And then in tax calculator user interface, it used the tax class to create an array with 3 elements of tax objects for the tax calculation. The application requires 3 input, which are total income, tax deduction amount, and also the marital status. The tax calculator user interface class consists of 2 methods to perform. The first one is the method button calculate action perform, which read all the inputs and then perform tax calculation by invoking the calculate tax method of the tax object, and then it will display the taxable income and the tax amount. It also has the method main, which calls the button calculate action perform. And then in the tax class, it has the method called calculate tax that calculates the tax amount by multiplying the tax rate with the taxable income amount and then returns the tax amount. Tax rate is based on status and taxable income amount. The other method, which is called get taxable income, it updates the taxable income value and returns the value accordingly. The sample output are also given, where it says income tax calculator. It asks the user to enter name, enter ID, and also enter the status. It also asks for the total income and also deductions, and then it will calculate what is the taxable income and the tax amount. Let's look at tax class first. So based on the UML diagram, we can write some of the codes first. So we know that we have the instance variable. So we have private double taxable income, and then we have private string status, private double deductions, private double tax amount. And then we have rate 1, rate 2, and rate 3. So those are written in capital letters, meaning that those are constants. So usually constants would be final, right? So we would write private final double rate 1 equal to 0.10, private final double rate 2 equal to 0.20, and then we have private final double rate 3 equal to 0.35. So we are done with the variables. Now let's go to the methods. So the first one, we have tax, and then in the bracket double and also string. That refers to the constructor with 2 input. So currently we are not sure what input does the double and string would be. So let's move on to the next one. Next method is called set deductions. It takes in a double and then the return type is void. So based on the name, when it wants to set the deductions, it must take in a deduction value, right? So we can write it as public void set deductions double deductions. Moving on to the third method, which is get taxable income, and then it should return a double. So we can write it as public double get taxable income. And we know that it should return something. So it can be return taxable income. because we have a variable called private double taxable income. Then the last method that we have is called calculate tax, and it should return a double. So we can write it as public double calculate tax, return tax amount, for example. How do I know that it should return tax amount? So based on the variables that we have taxable income, status, deductions, and also tax amount. So when we calculate the tax, we are returning whatever the value of the tax, right? So it makes sense to use tax amount as the value that will be returned. Currently, we only have the skeleton based on the UML diagram. So let's look through the question and fill in our class called tax. In the question, it says that method calculate tax calculates the tax amount by multiplying the tax rate with the taxable income amount and returns the tax amount. So the variable that we have is called tax amount and it's of type private, right? So in our calculate tax, we would have return tax amount to refer to that variable. We are not finished with what we should write inside calculate tax yet. So let's look at our public void set deductions. Based on the name of the method, it should take in an input that is called deductions. So we can write public void set deductions double deductions, and then this dot deductions, which refer to our private double deductions, equal to deductions, which is whatever the user would input. If we look back at our variables, we can see that we have used private double deductions and also private double tax amount. So we know that the other two variables are what we should write in our constructor. So we know that our constructor will take in two input. The first one is type double, so it would be the taxable income. The second one would be of type string, so it will be status. So we would write it as tax double taxable income string status. And because our variable is type private, whatever that the user input from the constructor, we want to save it into our variable. So we would write this dot taxable income equal to taxable income and this dot status equal to status. Now let's go back to the method calculate tax. The tax is calculated based on the taxable income, whether single or married, and also the tax rate. You can use if, else, or switch in this case. Remember that we have written our constants previously. So, to calculate it, you should use the tax rate that is called rate 1, rate 2, or rate 3 instead of writing the numbers 10%, 20%, or 35%. So for this method, you can see that an example on how to write it, you can have public double calculate tax if status dot equals to single, and then if the taxable income is larger than 51001, then you calculate it by tax amount equal to rate 3 times with taxable income. Else, you would multiply it with rate 2, and then else you would multiply it with rate 1. And then I have another else. So the other else refer to if the status is equals to married, then it will calculate it differently. You can use if, else, or you can use two if statements. So it depends on which one you prefer to have. It should give you similar results. Why did I say similar results? So if we have if and else, that means that the first one is true if the user enters single. Say that the user enters single but with the wrong spelling. For example, single with double S. Then it will calculate it based on the else. You can also have in your else another if statement so that you can check if the status is equals to married. So there are different ways of doing it. The other method that we need to write is the get taxable income. It says that it updates the taxable income value and returns the value accordingly. So we are given the way to calculate it by writing taxable income equal to total income minus tax deduction amount. So in our method, we would write public double get taxable income minus equal deductions, or you can write it as taxable income equal taxable income minus deductions. So those are just the same thing. And then because in this method it should return a double, so it would return the taxable income. Now that we have done with the tax class, we need to write for tax calculator user interface class. Let's go through the UML diagram. So in the UML diagram, the first one, the instance variable, it is an array. So it says that we need to write tax array. So we would write it as tax t, or whatever you want to call it, equal to new tax. And in the question, it says that we need to have an array with 3 elements. That's why we write 3. So we have 3 elements, and the index number that we will have is 0, 1, and also 2. Right? So those are 3 elements. And then from the UML diagram, we can see that we need to have 2 methods. The first one is called button calculate action perform. It's of type private and the return type is void. So we would write it as private void button calculate action perform. And then the second method that we need to have is the main method. So we would write it as public static void main string args. Going back to the question, it says that the application requires 3 input, which are total income, tax deduction amount, and marital status. And then in method button calculate action perform, it read all of the inputs and then perform the calculation. Okay, so let's do the first one first. Read all the inputs. So that is straightforward. So we have our system.out.println. It will print out income tax calculator, and then another system.out.print where it asks the user to enter the name. When the user wants to enter the name, we would save it inside a variable. So this is a local variable that we call it as name. So we have name equal input.nextLine. So remember that you need to have your scanner input equal to new scanner system.in. And then because you want to use your scanner, you have to write your import. So we have import java.util.scanner. So now we only have one input. We need to ask for another input. So we will ask the user to enter the ID. So system.out.print, enter ID. And then we have another local variable called ID. So I wrote here as ID equal input.nextLine. And then we ask the user to enter the status. So I wrote status equal input.nextLine. And then to be able to do all the calculations, we need to ask the user to enter the total income and also the deductions. So I wrote income equal input.nextDouble and deductions equal input.nextDouble. So all the values that the user input, I save all of those inside the local variable. Okay, going back to the question, it says after we have read all of the inputs, we need to perform tax calculation by invoking the calculate tax method of the tax object. So remember that we have defined and create our tax object, and it is an array with 3 elements. And also based on the output, we need to ask for the user to enter 3 times. So we would write everything that we went through earlier inside the for loop. So in the for loop, I wrote it as for int I equal to 0, I less than t.length I++. So that means that if I want to change my array to have more elements, then I don't have to change the value inside my for loop. To invoke the calculate tax, I would write it as ti equal new tax income status. So I'm calling the constructor and creating the object of it. And then I need to set the value for deductions. So I would write ti equal ti.set deductions, and it takes in the input, which is deductions. And to call the calculate tax, so I can have a local variable and save whatever value from calculate tax into the variable. Or I can use it as what I have written over here. So I wrote the system.out.println straight away, and it should display your tax amount equal RM, and then it calls the method straight away, ti.calculateTax. And the last part inside button calculate action perform, we need to display the taxable income and the tax amount. So the first one in the output, it needs to display the name and also the ID. So I just use the system.out.println, display the name and then the ID. And then to get the taxable income, I would have to call the get taxable income. So I wrote it as ti.getTaxableIncome. And then as before, it display your tax amount by calling the ti.calculateTax. Now we need to write the other method, which is called main. Inside main, it will call the button calculate action perform. So in the main method, I would create an object of the class. So I would write tax calculator UI t equal new tax calculator UI. Then I would call the button calculate action perform method by writing t.button calculate action perform. If I have my button calculate action perform as static, then I don't have to create an object of the class. So that's another way of doing it. You can put all these codes together and try and run it. You should get the output as what it is expected. So that's it for question 1. Let's continue with question 2. So this is taken from 2015-2016 first semester. So in this question, it says Bank XYZ is a new local bank currently operating at Sintok, Kedah. In order to make a service that deals with a customer saving account to be managed efficiently and systematically, the application that helps to realize the service needs to be developed. You are one of the appointed programmers to be part of the development team. As for the initial version of the application, the following UML class diagram is produced. So we have these two UML class diagram. The first one is the class name savings account, and the second one is called manage savings account user interface. Application manage savings account user interface uses the savings account class to create a savings account object for the tax calculation. The application requires 4 input, so we need to have the starting balance, annual interest rate, annual deposit amount, and annual withdrawal amount. Saving accounts, it consists of 6 methods, so we need to have the constructor called saving account, where it set the initial balance and annual interest rate. So if you look in the question, there's some error over there because our class is called savings account, but the constructor over here, it says it's saving account, right? So remember that the class name and the constructor, it needs to be the same one. And then we need to write the method set total deposits, set total withdrawals, calculate total interest, calculate total balance, and then the Tostring method. In Manage Savings Account User Interface, it has three methods. So we have the main method, and then in the main method, it will call the button calculate all action performed. The second method we have is called button calculate all action performed, and then the third method is called button view data action performed. We also have the example of the expected output shown on your left side. So it will display savings account management system, and then printing out starting balance, the user will input it, annual interest rate, annual deposit amount, and also the annual withdrawal amount, and then the calculation of it and display the results. Based on the UML diagram, we can write the skeleton of our codes. So we can have our savings account class. So we will write it as public class savings account. And then we have the instance variable that we need to have. So we have private double balance, annual interest rates, private double total deposits, total withdrawals, and total interest. So you can write it in 2 lines as what I did, or you can have it in different lines. It's just the same thing. Okay, and then we need to write the constructor. So we have savings account. It takes in 2 input. So in the instruction, it says that you will need to set the initial balance and annual interest rate. So 2 inputs that it will take in. The first one is double balance. The second one is double annual interest rate. We need to write the set total deposits method. Based on the name of it, we would know that it will take in the input of total deposits. So we would write it as public void set total deposits double deposits. The next method is the set total withdrawals. It takes in 1 input. So the input should be the total withdrawals as well. So we would write it as public void set total withdrawals double total withdrawals. Next one is calculate total interest. The return type is void. So we would write it as public void calculate total interest. The next method is calculate total balance. So public void calculate total balance. And the last one is the Tostring method. So we are overriding the Tostring that is already available. It should return a string. So we write public string Tostring, and it should return something. Now that we have written the skeleton based on the UML diagram, so we can look into the details that we need to write in the methods. In the constructor, it says that set the initial balance and annual interest rate. So we have our instance variable called balance and annual interest rate. So we will write it as this.balance, which refers to our instance variable, equal to balance. So balance is our local variable, the input that the user wrote in. And then this.annual interest rate equal annual interest rate. So you can call the local variables as something else if you want. Next method, which is the set total deposit. It sets the total deposit and adds the amount to the balance. So to set the value, so we will write this.total deposits equal total deposits, which is the value that the user input, and then adds the amount to the balance. So balance plus equal this.total deposits, or you can write it as balance equal balance plus this.total deposits. Moving on to the next method, which is set total withdrawals. It says that it sets the total withdrawal and subtract it from the amount to the balance. So we will write it as public void set total withdrawals double total withdrawals. Setting the value, this.total withdrawals equal total withdrawals. subtract it from the amount to the balance. So balance minus equal this dot total withdraws. Or you can write it as balance equal balance minus this dot total withdraws. So we have 3 more methods to write. So in calculate total interest, it calculates the total interest by multiplying the annual interest rate with the balance. So we have our instance variable, annual interest rate, and also the total interest. And we also have the balance. So in calculate total interest, we will calculate it by writing total interest equal balance times annual interest rate. As this method is in the same class, it can access any variables that is private. We have the calculate total balance method. So it calculates the total balance by adding the balance with the total interest. So we would write public void calculate total balance, balance plus equal total interest. Or you can write it as balance equal balance plus total interest. The last method that we need to write is the Tostring method. So this refers to the output that is expected to be displayed. So we will write public string toString. So over here I have a local variable called string output. If you want, you can choose not to write the local variable and straight away write all of those straight away in your return. In this example, I wrote it in 4 lines. So I have string output equal, the first one is the ending balance is RM, and then it will print out whatever the value of the balance is. And then in the next line, I wrote output plus equal total amount of deposits RM and call the total deposit variable. This means that I want to include the first line with the second line. So the sentences will be added. And then it should also print out the total amount of withdrawals and total interest earned. Remember that the variables that is called balance, total deposits, total withdrawals, and also total interest are private. So users cannot access to those variables values, but instead, because this toString method is type public, then if the user wants to see what are the values of it, then they can go through the toString method because this is public. Now that we are done with the savings account class, let's write our manage savings account user interface based on the UML diagram. So we have savings account. So we are going to define the object of it. So in our public class manage savings account UI, we have savings account as. So we are not creating any object yet because savings account constructor, it takes in 2 input and we don't have any values for those input yet. So we are just defining it so far. And inside manage savings account UI, we have 3 methods. The first one is private void button calculate all action perform. The second one is private void button display output action perform. And then the third one is public static void main string args. There's a bit of an error for the second method because in the question it says the method is called button view data action perform, while in the UML diagram it is called button display output action perform. You can use either one in this question because that is my error. So as I mentioned previously, you would have your savings account being defined. You don't have to create the object yet. Inside the main method, it says that it will call button calculate all action performed and button view data action performed. So I would write system.out.println savings account management system, so that will be displayed, and then create an object of the class. So manage savings account UIA equal new manage savings account UI. To call the methods, I would use a.button calculate all action performed, so that is calling the first one. To call the second method, I would write a.button display output action performed. If you have your button calculate all action performed and button display output action performed as static, then you don't have to create an object of your manage savings account UI class. In button calculate all action performed, so it needs to read all the inputs, so we would use our scanner. So in the code, I have local variables called double balance, deposit, withdraw, and also int rate. And then remember that when you use scanner, you need to write your input statement. So we have input java.util.scanner. So the first one, it asks the user to enter the starting balance, annual interest rate, annual deposit amount, and also annual withdraw amount. So I have balance equal input.next double, rate equal input.next in, deposit equal input.next double, and for the withdraw equal input.next double. Okay, and then we need to perform the following operations by invoking the respective methods of the savings account. So we would set the total amount of deposit, set the total amount of withdraw, calculate the total interest earned, and calculate the balance of a saving account at the end of the year. In the Manage Savings Account UI, we have defined our savings account as. So now we can create the object of it. So we would write S equal new savings account. It takes in two input. So the first one is the balance, the second one is the rate. You can check back to the instruction for the savings account constructor. To set the deposit, we are calling the set total deposits method. It takes in one input, which is of the deposit. So we write s.set total deposits deposit. Next one is set the total amount of withdraw. So we write s.set total withdraws, and the input that it takes is the withdraw values. Then we need to calculate the total interest earned and calculate the balance. So we would call s.calculate total interest and also s.calculate total balance. Those methods of type void, so it will not return any value back. The last part, which is the method button view data action perform, it displays the saving account details including the ending balance, the total amount of deposit, the total amount of withdrawal, and the total interest earned. So in this method, it will call the toString. So you can write it as system.out.println s, which refers to the object of your savings account, or you can also write it as s.toString. That is the beauty of using toString, because you don't have to write specifically the method that you want to call. We just need to write the object straight away, and it will call the toString automatically. Say that you have another method that you call as display output. Then if you want to display it, then you have to write s.display output. But for toString, you can choose to write s.toString or straight away writing s. Try and put all these codes together and run it. You should get the output as the sample output that is given. And that's all for question 2. If you have any other question or any of my explanation that is not clear, feel free to ask me about it. This is one of the example of the answers that are expected from this assignment. If your codes are slightly different, that's fine as well, as long as it follows the UML class diagram and also the instructions given. That's all from me. Thank you.